The dress was ready, the flowers were picked, and every detail of the wedding seemed to be falling into place like a fairy tale. The bride, telling her story, described how she had always dreamed of that moment and how Nate seemed like the perfect partner. The thought of walking down the aisle made her heart beat faster. Everything seemed to be moving smoothly toward the big day that would seal their love. However, from the very start of the planning, something was bothering her. The sparkle in Nate's eyes was genuine, but Kayla, his twin sister, was always by his side. Unlike the warm smiles she received from other family members, Kayla seemed to have a cold, calculating look in her eyes. Even though no one said anything outright, the tension was palpable. She remembered the first time she met Kayla. At first, she thought they could be friends, since they both wanted what was best for Nate. But little by little, she realized that Kayla treated her more like an intruder than a future sister-in-law. Every gesture from Kayla was filled with distrust and a certain hidden disdain. With every encounter, the feeling of rejection grew stronger. Despite this, the bride tried to ignore the signs. She preferred to believe it was just sisterly jealousy or a difficulty accepting change. After all, Nate and Kayla had always been inseparable, raised as if they were two halves of the same person. Their bond was so strong that it was sometimes unsettling, but she trusted that, with time, Kayla would learn to accept her. The bride's friends, however, noticed her discomfort. In private conversations, they warned her that Kayla's behavior was more than simple jealousy. Some even suggested she was plotting something, but the bride didn't want to believe it. Her heart was full of hope, and thinking about problems at that moment seemed like a waste. Even so, there were nights when doubt tormented her. Did Kayla truly want what was best for her brother? Or was she just trying to maintain control over him? The bride tried to push these thoughts away, convincing herself that everything would be fine. The wedding, after all, was bigger than any family rivalry. Time flew by, and the preparations only increased the anticipation. With every visit to the wedding venue, the bride was moved. She pictured herself walking in arm with her father, with Nate waiting for her at the altar, ready to start a new life together. It was the picture of perfect happiness. Deep down, however, there was a discomfort she couldn't ignore. Kayla's shadow loomed over every decision, every detail, as if she had something to prove. The bride tried to convince herself it was all in her head, but the gut feeling wouldn't leave her. Even with these doubts, her love for Nate seemed to make it all worth it. He was kind, dedicated, and did everything to make her smile. That was enough to keep moving forward, believing that love would conquer any obstacle. And so, between dreams and anxieties, the big day seemed to get closer and closer. But what she didn't know was that this fairy tale was about to turn into a carefully crafted nightmare.
If you also believe that true love must weather even the storms within your own family, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. That way you won't miss any of the upcoming stories that will touch your heart, just like this one, which is only getting started. The first real shock came during a family dinner, when Kayla coldly asked the bride if she was sure she was ready to take on so much responsibility. The question seemed innocent, but her tone was pure poison. The atmosphere grew heavy, and Nate, as usual, just laughed it off to ease the tension. The bride felt her cheeks burn. It was the first time Kayla had openly challenged her so directly. She tried to respond gracefully, saying she was prepared and that she loved Nate, but she could tell no one seemed convinced. The twins' parents exchanged silent glances, as if they shared Kayla's doubts. After that dinner, the subtle comments intensified. Kayla always found a way to belittle the bride, whether by criticizing her choices for the wedding or hinting that she was controlling her brother. Every word was carefully chosen to sound like advice, but it carried a hidden judgment. Little by little, the bride realized Kayla was gaining ground. The family, once warm, began to show reservations. Their once lively conversations turned cold and formal. It felt like everyone expected the wedding to fall apart before it even happened. Nate, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to what was going on. He always said Kayla just needed time to adjust. To him, there was no reason to worry, and that only added to the bride's frustration, leaving her feeling increasingly alone in this silent battle. Despite it all, she still tried to reach out to her future sister-in-law. She offered help, invited Kayla to take part in the preparations, but she always received short or negative replies. It was like knocking on a locked door. The hostility, once disguised, was now becoming clearer and clearer. The bride's friends began warning her that this wasn't normal. They told her she should open her eyes and not let Kayla dictate the course of her life. But at the same time, they advised caution. Confronting the twin sister could be a fatal mistake. Even so, the bride couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. What was supposed to be one of the happiest times of her life was turning into an invisible battlefield. Every step she took felt watched, every decision questioned.
Still, she believed she could endure it. Her love for Nate was her anchor, and giving up wasn't part of her plan. No matter how much Kayla tried to stand in their way, she was determined to move forward. But little did she know, the real storm was yet to come. The morning started like any other, but it ended in disaster. The bride received an unexpected call from the manager of the venue where the wedding was supposed to be held. The man's serious tone left no room for doubt. The reservation had been canceled. Unable to believe what she was hearing, she asked for an explanation, convinced there had been some mistake. The manager explained that he had received a call in the couple's name confirming the cancellation. To make matters worse, the reservation documents had been resubmitted, this time with a forged signature. Shock took over her. How could someone have done this? And more importantly, who would want to ruin her big day? Her heart racing, the bride immediately thought of Kayla. Her words, always laced with poison, now made even more sense. The idea that her future sister-in-law could go to such extremes seemed unbelievable, yet every detail pointed to her. A feeling of betrayal began to eat away at her confidence. She rushed to Nate, hoping to find support and shared outrage. Instead, she found him hesitant, almost in disbelief. He insisted his sister would never do something so cruel. He tried to rationalize it, suggesting it could be a bureaucratic error, or even a scam by the venue itself. The bride, however, couldn't be convinced. The evidence was just too clear. Her intuition screamed that Kayla was behind it all. Her frustration grew as she realized Nate wasn't willing to confront her sister. Once again, he retreated into passivity, trying to avoid conflict. Desperate, the bride called the venue to try to get the reservation back, but it was too late. Another event had already been booked for the same date. All those months of planning had been thrown away in a matter of minutes. The pain was unbearable. Her friends tried to cheer her up, suggesting new venues, but the bride knew this blow wasn't just about logistics, it was emotional. Kayla wasn't just canceling a contract, she was directly attacking her dream, her dignity, and her place in the family. That night, alone in her room, the bride cried silently. For the first time, she wondered if this marriage was even worth it. Not for a lack of love, but because of the war that seemed inevitable. Was she about to marry a man who couldn't protect her? As tears streamed down her face, she made a vow to herself. She would not let Kayla win. She didn't know how yet, but she was determined to fight until the very end.
The next morning, the bride gathered her courage and went to Nate. There was no more room for silence or excuses. She demanded that he confront Kayla immediately. Her voice was filled with pain, but also with resolve. It was time to find out whose side he was really on. Nate listened to every word, but his expression remained conflicted. He said he understood her anger, but insisted that Kayla only wanted to protect him. He claimed his sister had always been his guardian, his other half, and that maybe she was just acting out of fear of losing him. The explanation sounded more like a justification than a defense. The bride felt her anger rising. "Protect? By canceling our wedding?" she shot back, unable to contain her outrage. To her, this wasn't sisterly love, it was control. And with each passing day, The feeling of being an outsider in their lives grew stronger. Nate tried to calm her, promising to talk to his sister, but his words felt empty, like promises repeated just to avoid an argument. Deep down, the bride knew he wouldn't have the courage to stand up to Kayla. The bond between the twins was stronger than any commitment to their marriage. Determined, the bride decided to confront Kayla herself. She went to her house, carrying all her pent-up fury. Kayla greeted her with a cold smile, as if she'd been expecting the visit. The confrontation was immediate. The bride accused Kayla of sabotaging the wedding, but her sister-in-law denied it calmly, flipping the situation to make it seem like she was the one being persecuted. Every word Kayla spoke was calculated to unsettle her. She claimed she only wanted what was best for Nate, and that she saw him being manipulated. The bride left angrier than before, but now certain she was facing a cunning opponent who could twist any situation. When she returned home, she found Nate restless. He had spoken to his sister, but nothing had changed. Kayla kept denying everything, and once again, he chose to believe her. A sense of powerlessness overwhelmed her. How could she fight someone who not only operated in the shadows, but also had the silent complicity of her own fiancé? Alone in her room, she faced her reflection in the mirror. Her tired face showed the signs of the emotional war she was living through. But in her eyes, a flame of resistance still burned. She might be seen as the villain for opposing the family, but she was willing to pay that price. In that moment, she made a decision. If Nate wouldn't confront Kayla, she would do it herself. She wouldn't let her life be dictated by her sister-in-law's manipulation any longer. The battle had only just begun. The days that followed were marked by suspicious looks and whispers in family gatherings. The bride began to notice that Nate's relatives were treating her with a certain distance. Instead of support, she faced uncomfortable questions about her life, her family, and even her intentions. The uncomfort was clear. Someone was planting doubts about her. It didn't take long to find the source. A close friend told her that Kayla had been spreading rumors, suggesting the bride was only interested in the family's money. The malicious lies spread like wildfire, eroding the trust of relatives who had once welcomed her with warmth.
Every visit to Nate's parents' house became a test of patience. The atmosphere, once welcoming, now felt thick with suspicion. The bride felt like every word was measured, every gesture scrutinized, as if she were a stranger who had to prove her worth. It was like fighting an invisible enemy. Nate, for his part, didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. He kept repeating that Kayla was just concerned, that it was just sisterly jealousy. His inability to recognize the manipulation hurt her more than the lies themselves. She wondered how much more of his silence she could take. Looking for relief, she confided in her friends. They were all in agreement. Kayla was clearly sabotaging everything, but their advice was divided. Some told her to confront Kayla head-on, while others warned that would only make things worse. The bride found herself in an impossible dilemma. Over time, the rumors began to spread among distant friends and even co-workers. Wherever she went, the bride felt there was always someone looking at her with suspicion. Kayla was winning, not just within the family, but throughout their entire social circle. The pain of being unfairly judged began to turn into fury. The bride vowed to herself that she wouldn't let Kayla destroy her reputation. But at the same time, she feared that every move she made would only reinforce the lies her sister-in-law was spreading. In this silent war, she began to realize she wasn't just fighting for her marriage. She was fighting for her own dignity. And Kayla, with her cold calculation, always seemed to be one step ahead. What hurt the most, though, was watching Nate remain passive. Between his love for her and his sister,
He seemed to choose neutrality. But in the bride's heart, that neutrality felt like a form of betrayal. The tension reached a new level when Nate's parents asked the couple to have a serious talk. Gathered in the living room, they tried to convince the two to postpone the wedding. Their arguments sounded reasonable. They said the relationship was moving too fast, that it would be better to wait a little longer. But the bride knew exactly where that idea had come from. Sitting across from them, she could see just how much Kayla had poisoned the family's heart. Every sentence carried the shadow of her sister-in-law's words. It felt like everyone was against her, ready to doubt her intentions. The weight of her isolation grew with every minute of that conversation. Nate, once again, tried to mediate. He said he understood the family's concerns, but that he loved his fiancé. Still, his words were fragile, almost timid, as if he were afraid to stand up to his parents. The bride felt her hope waver. If even his love couldn't stand firm, how could they possibly withstand this together? After the meeting, she confronted Nate with more intensity than ever before. She asked him if he truly wanted to get married, or if he was just going along with the flow. His silence felt like a stab to the heart. He said he loved her, but seemed completely unable to break free from his sister's influence. In the days that followed, the bride began to feel like a stranger in her own life. Every phone call, every meeting with Nate's family became a silent battle. The polite smiles hid criticism, and conversations were always loaded with double meanings. Kayla had successfully turned their relationship into a minefield. Determined not to give in, the bride started investigating. She tried to understand just how far Kayla would go and discovered that her sister-in-law was in constant contact with all their wedding vendors. It was as if she had eyes on every detail, ready to pull the strings and destroy whatever she wanted. Her fear grew, but so did her resolve. The bride could no longer rely on Nate's silence, nor on his family's understanding. All she had left was to trust herself and her own survival instinct. She knew she had to act smart. Kayla wasn't just a jealous sister. She was a ruthless strategist, capable of manipulating everyone around her. To beat her, love and hope wouldn't be enough. It would take courage and cunning. That night, staring at the dark ceiling of her bedroom, the bride felt completely alone in this invisible war. But she also realized something important. If she wanted to save her marriage, she would have to be ready to fight like she had never fought before. The days passed, and the bride began to notice a painful pattern. No matter what Kayla did, Nate always remained silent. He said he didn't want to create unnecessary conflict, but to her, that silence was confirmation that she was fighting this battle alone. His lack of a clear position made her question if she could really count on him. Every new problem was met with the same response. It will blow over, don't worry. But what Nate intended as reassurance, the bride heard as indifference. The wedding, which was supposed to be a union of strengths, was becoming a lopsided struggle where only one of them seemed willing to defend the relationship. The nights were the worst. While he slept peacefully, she lay awake imagining Kayla's next moves. The feeling of living under constant surveillance intensified, as if any decision she made could be used against her. The weight of that insecurity began to wear her down. In a desperate attempt to break through the silence, she asked Nate directly, "Whose side are you on?" Her heart nearly stopped as she waited for his answer. He, however, looked away and simply said he loved her. But for her, those words were no longer enough. The bride began to feel torn in two. On one hand, the love she felt for Nate was still real, still intense. On the other, his lack of action made her doubt if that love would be enough to weather the storm that was coming. His silence was no longer just unsettling.
It was destructive. Her friends noticed her exhaustion. One of them said, "The problem isn't Kayla. The problem is Nate not taking a stand." The words echoed in her mind, a truth she had been trying to avoid. Perhaps the biggest obstacle wasn't her future sister-in-law, but her own fiancé's inability to choose between her and his sister. Still, giving up wasn't an option. The bride knew there was still a chance to save their relationship, but that chance would depend on courage, and not just her own. Nate would finally have to break the suffocating bond that tied him to his sister. As she watched him sleeping peacefully beside her that night, she wondered, would he ever find the courage to fight for her? Or was she destined to fight this battle alone until the very end? It was on a rainy afternoon that the bride received a phone call that would change everything. A close friend, someone who had always quietly supported her, asked to meet with her urgently. His voice sounded serious, filled with secrets. Curious and apprehensive, she agreed. They met at a quiet cafe. The friend arrived with a folder in his hands and a worried look on his face. Without beating around the bush, he told her he had been observing Kayla for some time. He had gathered proof of her sabotage, messages, phone records, and even recordings that clearly showed her intention to destroy the wedding. The bride could hardly believe what she was seeing. Every page in that folder confirmed her suspicions. Kayla hadn't just canceled the venue. She had also tried to bribe vendors, spread lies in social circles, and even convince some relatives to turn against her. The extent of the manipulation was even greater than she had imagined. The relief of finally having proof was mixed with fear. Now she had a chance to expose Kayla, but she also risked turning Nate against her. After all, confronting his own sister wouldn't be easy, especially with the near symbiotic bond the two of them shared. Her friend insisted that she needed to use this evidence. He said it was the only way to show the family the truth and restore her credibility. But the bride hesitated. Part of her wanted to act immediately. Another part feared it would shatter her relationship with Nate for good. When she returned home, she hid the folder at the bottom of a closet. She lay awake all night thinking about what to do. For the first time in a long while, she felt she had a powerful weapon against her sister-in-law, but she also knew that weapon could be dangerous. As she watched Nate sleep, the bride wondered, would he ever find the courage to fight for her, or was she destined to fight this battle alone until the very end?
The decision she was about to make could change everything, not just the wedding, but their entire future. For days, the folder containing the evidence against Kayla remained hidden. Every time the bride looked at it, she felt the weight of the responsibility she carried. Exposing her sister-in-law could finally free her from the web of manipulation, but it could also mean the end of her relationship with Nate. The doubt consumed her. Meanwhile, Kayla seemed more confident than ever. The rumors kept spreading, and the bride felt the walls closing in around her. It was as if her sister-in-law knew she couldn't bring herself to act. This feeling of powerlessness ate away at her, making her more insecure with each passing day. When she talked with her friends, she received conflicting advice. Some encouraged her to reveal everything at once. Others urged caution, worried that Nate would see it as her declaring war on his family. Caught between these extremes, the bride felt suffocated. One evening, sitting with Nate, she almost told him everything. She looked into his eyes, searching for the strength to open up, but when she saw his calm expression, she hesitated. Part of her was afraid of shattering that peaceful demeanor with truths that could shake his entire world. Yet staying silent brought no relief. Every minute she kept that secret felt like a betrayal of herself. The weight of indecision made it hard to breathe freely. It was like being trapped in a web that Kayla had masterfully woven, where every move was risky. Deep down, the bride knew time was not on her side. Kayla would keep pushing, undermining her reputation until nothing was left. If she didn't act soon, she could lose not just the wedding, but her very sense of self. Lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, she whispered to herself,
I need to choose how I want to fight. In that moment, she realized this war wasn't just against Kayla, it was also against her own fear. The decision still wasn't made, but one thing was certain: the time to act was approaching. And when it came, there would be no turning back. Fate, however, didn't wait for her to make a decision. The truth came out during a casual conversation. While reviewing wedding plans with Nate, she mentioned that some vendors had been acting strangely evasive. His nervousness was too obvious to miss. The bride pressed him for answers. After a long silence, Nate finally confessed that he knew about some of his sister's interference. He admitted that on more than one occasion, Kayla had tried to sabotage the wedding, and he had chosen to hide it to avoid conflict.
His words hit her like stones. He knew. All that time she had felt alone, going crazy, wondering if she was just overreacting. Nate had known part of the truth. But instead of defending her, he had chosen to protect Kayla. The shock quickly turned to anger. She felt her blood boil, unable to believe that the man who had promised to stand by her had chosen passivity instead. The trust between them, already shaken, now shattered into a million pieces. Nate tried to explain himself. He said he didn't want to lose his sister, that he couldn't bear the thought of a direct confrontation. He kept saying he was trying to keep the peace. But to the bride, this wasn't peace. It was cowardice. It was betrayal. Tears welled up in her eyes before she could stop them. She cried not just because of his confession, but because of everything it meant. The wedding she had dreamed of was being destroyed not just by Kayla, but by Nate's inability to choose her side. In that moment, the hidden folder in her closet felt heavier than ever. Now it wasn't just about exposing Kayla. It was about facing the truth of who Nate really was, a divided man, unable to cut the ties that were suffocating them both. The silence that settled between them that night was deafening. There were no shouts, no further accusations, just the painful realization that perhaps the biggest threat to their marriage wasn't Kayla, but the groom himself. Lying next to him, the bride felt more alone than ever before. For the first time, she seriously questioned whether she should go through with it. The dawn of the new day felt heavier than usual. The silence between her and Nate hung over the house like a shadow. Every exchanged look was loaded with unspoken words, and the distance between them became almost tangible. The bride knew she couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. Their relationship needed clarity, or she would lose herself completely. After breakfast, she took a deep breath and spoke firmly. "Nate, I need to know if you really want to marry me." Her voice trembled, but her gaze remained steady. He tried to respond with affection, saying he loved her, but she wouldn't let him repeat the same old lines. "Love isn't enough," she cut him off. "I need someone who will stand up for me, not hide behind excuses." Nate looked down. He said he was trying to balance everything, that he didn't want to lose either his sister or the woman he loved. The bride then said what she had been holding back for so long. "You've been losing me every time you stayed silent." Her words, harsh and honest, made the air in the room feel thick. She decided to give him an ultimatum. Either he confronted Kayla and put a stop to the manipulation once and for all, or the wedding was off. There was no more room for neutrality. A decision had to be made, and quickly. Nate's face went pale. The fear he felt was visible, not just of losing his bride, but of facing his sister.
For hours, he remained silent, pacing around the house, trying to find an answer that didn't exist. The bride sat watching his every move, aware that this moment would define their future. The clock ticked away like a cruel countdown. Finally, Nate asked for more time. He said he needed to think things through carefully. That phrase was the last straw. The bride just nodded without saying another word. Inside,
something broke for good. For the first time, she considered that maybe love wasn't enough to overcome cowardice. That night, she looked again at the folder hidden in her closet. This time, she knew what she had to do. If Nate didn't have the courage to fight for them, she would do it herself, even if it meant fighting alone. 2 days later, Nate's family house was full. A dinner had been arranged to calm things down, but the bride knew it would be the perfect setting to bring everything into the open. She brought the folder with her. Her hands were shaking, but her heart was resolved. That night would be the point of no return. The table was set, the smiles were forced, and Kayla, as usual, commanded everyone's attention. The bride watched her every move, the sweet tone she used, as if she were a misunderstood saint. But beneath that surface of innocence was pure poison, and it was time for everyone to see it. When dinner ended, the bride asked to speak. Everyone looked at her in surprise. In a steady voice, she began talking about everything she had been facing since the wedding planning began. With every sentence, the tension grew. Kayla tried to interrupt, but she kept going. Then she placed the folder on the table. The evidence was revealed one piece at a time. Messages, recordings, phone calls, all of it was there, undeniable. The room fell in absolute silence. Kayla's face went pale, and the twins' parents looked stunned. What had once been doubt turned into shock. The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Kayla tried to defend herself, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she only wanted to protect Nate. But the more she spoke, the more she tangled herself in lies. The evidence was irrefutable. The mask was finally slipping. The bride looked at Nate. He was frozen, his face pale, his eyes glistening. All she wanted was one word from him, a defense, a reaction, anything. But he just lowered his head in silence. That lack of response hurt more than all of Kayla's lies combined. It was the final blow. The dinner ended in chaos. Kayla left in tears, the parents were in shock, and the bride stood alone facing Nate, who had nothing to say. In that moment, she understood that love is only strong when there is courage behind it. And Nate, for all his feelings, still had none.
That night, after the disastrous dinner, the house was plunged into silence. The bride walked through the empty rooms, trying to process what had just happened. The truth was out in the open, but the emptiness in her chest felt greater than any sense of victory. Instead of relief, she felt only exhaustion. Nate still hadn't said a word. He remained sitting in the living room, his gaze fixed on the floor, as if he didn't know how to react. The bride watched him from a distance, waiting for a gesture, an attempt to reach out. But nothing came. It was as if he had turned into a statue. Hours passed before she finally broke the silence. "Aren't you going to say anything?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. Nate looked up, his eyes glistening, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. He stammered something about being confused, about not knowing how to handle everything. His reply felt like a stab to the heart. "You didn't need to understand everything, Nate. You just needed to stand up for me." Tears streamed down her face, but there was no anger left, only a deep, almost resigned sadness. He tried to move closer, but she stepped back. The chasm between them felt insurmountable. As she got her things ready for bed, the bride realized this might be the end. Not because there was no love, but because love without action couldn't survive. She loved Nate, but she couldn't keep being the only one fighting for them. In the early hours of the morning, Kayla sent a message. She claimed to be sorry, but her tone was cold, almost provocative. The bride deleted it without responding. For the first time she understood, she didn't need to justify herself anymore. This wasn't her battle to fight. It was between Nate and his own conscience. Before falling asleep, she made a quiet decision. If Nate hadn't chosen by morning, she would leave, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. The sun rose timidly and the house remained wrapped in an almost sacred silence. The bride woke up early, packed her things, and left a suitcase ready by the door. She was prepared to leave, but deep down, she still hoped Nate would say something, anything, to make her stay. He appeared in the kitchen, his face tired, his eyes red. He stood still for a few seconds, watching her make coffee, as if trying to memorize every movement. Then in a low voice, he began to speak. "You're right. I let you fight alone for far too long." Those simple but sincere words made her stop what she was doing. He continued, "I grew up believing Kayla and I were inseparable, that nothing could ever change that. But now I understand that what she calls love is just fear, and I let that fear control my life." The bride watched him silently, trying to hold back her tears. For the first time, she saw in Nate not an indecisive man, but someone willing to face the consequences. He took a deep breath and finished, "I need to end this. I need to choose. And I choose you."
Without waiting for a response, Nate picked up his phone and called his sister. The conversation was tense, filled with pauses and tears. He told her he wouldn't allow any more interference, that the wedding was happening and that she needed to step back for a while. With each word, his voice grew steadier. The call ended with Kayla shouting something on the other end of the line. And then, silence. When he hung up, Nate looked exhausted but relieved. He turned to his bride and said, "Maybe I waited too long, but now I understand what it means to fight for someone." She moved closer to him slowly, her heart torn between pain and hope. They held each other in silence, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again. The break had been painful, but necessary. The dependency between the twins had been broken, and with it, the cycle of manipulation. In that embrace, there was no promise of perfection, only the certainty that true love begins when you choose courage. A few months had passed since the final confrontation. Time, while not erasing the wounds, had begun to slowly heal them. The wedding had been rescheduled at a new venue, a small garden outside the city, simple but full of meaning. There was no luxury, only love and peace. The bride, now more serene, finally felt like the author of her own story. This time, the preparations happened without interference. Kayla's absence was noticeable, but not mourned. Her silence was an uneasy truce, and no one knew if it meant remorse or just a strategic retreat. Still, the bride decided she would no longer live in fear. Nate was different. He had become more present, more decisive. For the first time, he was making choices without consulting his sister. He seemed to understand that to love also meant to protect, and that protecting was not the same as submitting. He and his bride began rebuilding their trust, step by step, without rushing, aware of the scars they still carried. At the wedding rehearsal, Nate's parents apologized. They said they had let themselves be influenced too much by Kayla, and now saw how unfair they had been. The bride accepted their apology with a reserved smile, not out of pride, but because she had learned that forgiveness, like love, requires time. On the big day, the sun shone brightly. Flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the distant sound of a piano accompanied every step. When the bride entered the garden, dressed in white, she saw Nate waving at the altar with a look full of tenderness and remorse. For the first time, there was no shadow of doubt between them. During the ceremony, as they exchanged vows, she felt her heart grow light. The words they spoke weren't empty promises, but a reflection of everything they had faced together. Every tear, every pain, every difficult decision had led them to that moment. But at the end of the ceremony, as everyone prepared to celebrate, something unexpected happened. Among the guests, a distant figure caught her attention. A woman in sunglasses, watching silently, half hidden behind the trees. Her heart raced. Even from afar, she knew who it was. Kayla. She didn't approach. She just watched, motionless, until the couple shared their final kiss. Then, slowly, she turned and walked away. For a moment, the bride felt the chill, but she decided not to let it shake her. She looked at Nate, who was smiling, unaware of his sister's presence, and knew the past would stay where it belonged. As the guests applauded, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The war was over, at least for now. But deep down, something told her that Kayla's story wasn't finished yet. And perhaps, someday, fate would cross their paths again. And now I ask you, how far would you go for love? If this story held your attention until the very end, subscribe to the channel now and come join our community of family stories, where every emotion is real and every ending leaves a mark. The next one might be even more intense than this one.